It's not every day that you get to ride something that's truly different. And that's what this is. And we had to time travel 20 years to find it. It's called the MT-01, and Yamaha started building them in 2005. This specific one is a 2006 model and comes off the showroom of Bike Shop Ravonia, and could leave the showroom floor permanently if you part ways with 129,000 Rand. This seems like a lot of motorcycle for that price. It seems like a lot of motorcycle in general. Look at those mad exhausts, that big engine, and that aggressive countenance. Yamaha did something right with this, and I've never ridden one. So, good people at home, you're about to see a 41-year-old man become a little child. Okay, here we go. Started up. There's not much of a ceremony on the day. Well, there's not much of a dash, so you know. Anyway, let's start her up. Oh, hello. You see that through like the bars and all that. You can like. There's something alive. There's something alive under. Oh. Wait. You open the throttle and thunder happens. Okay, now I'm looking forward to this. Here we go. Oh, listen to that. And it stays alive when you exit the parking lot and enter the public road. This bike is definitely alive. There's something living and breathing underneath there somewhere. A creature, a beastly creature, a monstrous creature with a name. Like Nigel. This one's name is Nigel. Don't know why his parents thought Nigel was a good idea, a good name for a monster, but they did. Doesn't take away from his monsterliness. But every time you crack open the throttle, it's just, there's a growl of anger, like a roar of sort of rage. This bike is a lot of fun until you start riding it fast. And then it's sort of less fun when you go fast, because in fact it's not actually that fast as a bike. And that's where we get to the true uniqueness of the MT-01. It may look like it should compete with the likes of the Suzuki B-King that was powered by a 4-cylinder Hayabusa motor, but that's not what is going on here. This motor is a 1670cc air-cooled V-twin, and designed more to be the kind of muscle bike than a streamlined speed machine. However, this bike is not about going fast, it's going from slow to fast. That's where it really thrives. So what you need to do is start off here. So we're doing 42 kilometers per hour, we're at 22,000 RPM, and we open the throttle. I mean, I'm not even going to say it accelerates that fast in terms of, stopwatch measuring acceleration. It's not even that fast, but just the way it feels while it's accelerating. I mean, that's the point. In fact, it feels a bit like a Harley Davidson, because in many ways, it is sort of based on a Harley Davidson. This motor was originally designed for the Yamaha XV1700 Cruiser that was literally put on the road to go head-to-head with Harley Davidson. It's big and simple and pushes a somewhat sedate 89 horsepower. That's not a lot, especially as this thing weighs 265 kilograms with all the fluids on board. Although cruiser motors are far from boring, they are about the experience. So while the power may not be something to brag about, the torque comes grunting out with 150 Newton meters, and that's not bad at all, especially as we have to keep in mind that this thing is low tech. Look at this dash. As I say, very old school. You got a giant round rev counter, then you got a small little LED dash, not even LED, sorry, LCD, I don't even know what that's called, showing your speed. And you got these buttons here. Right there, you push select, and you got a choice of trip 1, trip 2, and odometer. That's it. Information overload. I'm sort of looking for a whole lot of buttons here on the handlebars, because that's what we're kind of used to, especially a bike of this sort of size and class. You kind of think there's buttons everywhere, but not really. I mean, it's sort of, this is very old school. We're now 2005 when buttons hadn't been properly invented yet. Well, buttons, I mean, they do the usual. There's lights and hooters and indicators. Very old school, imagine that. In fact, Ferrari, my Hero X-Pulse, has more gadgets on it, and that's a cheap little sort of, economy bike. It has more gadgets than this thing. A bike in 2024, that's a cheapy little thing, has more gadgets than what, like a prestigious motorcycle 20 years ago. That's very cool, actually. Progress, yes.
However, one thing cruisers are not designed to do is go around corners. That's where the MT-01 is very different. The frame is aluminium and based directly off the R1 superbike of the time, including the signature upside down swing arm. The suspension and brakes also straight off the R1.
So with that, it handles pretty damn well. There you go, solid, stable, lean in. Doesn't even feel that heavy. You can't expect a bike of this sort of bulk and this sort of motor, this amount of sort of ironmongery, to be heavy and a bit kind of dull. It's not. And the brakes, I mean, even for 20-year-old brakes, that's better than a lot of the stuff you get nowadays.
And then we get to the ergonomics, and it's all just as you'd expect.
As far as the seating goes, it's sort of typical naked bike, so the seat is a little bit hard. This is the sort of sporty seat as far as I can tell. And the handlebars are a bit higher than were you sitting on a proper superbike. So your chiropractor's not going to get his holiday to the Bahamas paid for with this thing. It's also not entirely comfortable. Obviously, there's no screen, so higher speeds and you're going to get your neck blown off.
This is a glorious motorcycle that will induce smiles so wide that your head is in danger of coming off. And none of it is down to what is on paper. It's all about feeling and soul. And that's something the Japanese, who are usually obsessed with paper numbers, are often not good at. And yet here we are. Or sadly, were. The MT-01 went out of production in 2012. So the only place to find them is on showrooms like that of Bike Shop Ravonia. That begs more questions like, is it safe buying a near 20-year-old sport bike? Well, the short answer is yes.
This bike is so well looked after. It's a 20-year-old bike. 20-year-old bikes are supposed to be a bit sort of kaput, and this is not. So obviously the previous owner really, really looked after it. It's got 23,000 kilometers, which is nothing. But more than that, I'm told that this went through the workshop of Bike Shop Ravonia. The crack team in the workshop there did give this thing a full once-over everywhere, checked to make sure that everything works. And everything works. Everything is perfect. There we go, another corner. Oh, that's fun. I'm going to do it just once more. Once more. Slow down. 2,000. Slow down. Wait, no. Go right there. So 2,000 RPM, 43 kilometers per hour. Open the throttle. I'm just going to do that all day. Slow down, accelerate, slow down, accelerate, slow down, accelerate all day. That's all I'm going to do. So anyway, that's it for this week of the Bike Show, because all I'm going to just do is that forever. Unlucky.
I can't say I blame him. There is something rather addictive about a decent hit of torque. I know that horsepower is the number that gets bandied around whenever you're down the pub, but given the way that the vast majority of riders use their bikes on the road, where they steer clear of high RPM and hence peak horsepower, it's actually torque that is the more important and useful measure of an engine's, I was going to say usability, but enjoyability, if there was such a word, would be even more appropriate. The MT in MT-01 stands for Masters of Torque, which is entirely justified given the MT-01's supersized X-Cruiser engine. Not so relevant today when, as Don mentioned, the MT-01 no longer exists and the rest of what is now an extensive naked MT range that stretches from single-cylinder small capacity bikes through middleweight parallel twins and triples to a range-topping 1 litre cross-plane crank inline 4 seems to have gone much more overtly sporty and rev-hungry, as is the way of all naked sport bikes these days, I suppose. The MT-01 broke the mould by going with this big, lazy, torquey, air-cooled V-twin back in 2005, and I remember being intrigued by what Yamaha was offering, and consequently I was more than a little peeved when no South African journalists cracked the nod to the world launch of the bike when it was unveiled to the press in Cape Town. That egregious snub aside, when I eventually did ride the bike a few short months later, I sort of liked it, but couldn't bring myself to be much more enthusiastic than that. Probably because, 18 years ago now, I was still in my 30s and obsessed with horsepower and speed and razor-sharp handling, and was lacking any desire or ability to appreciate something quite so out of left field as the MT-01. There were some other bikes from that first decade of the new century that also tried similarly to forge a different path for themselves. Triumph's Rocket 3 is the one that springs most readily to mind. Stupid amounts of torque from its 2.3 litre triple, 220 newton metres or something, and although it eventually came to be regarded as a kind of oddball naked muscle bike, it was originally conceived as a direct competitor to some of Harley-Davidson's bigger, more performance-oriented cruisers. It's a bike that has got better and more refined and more accepted as the years have passed, but I can still remember the shock of being confronted with a 2.3 litre triple when everyone was still going gaga about Kawasaki recently breaking through the 2 litre barrier with a V-twin. And then, of course, you had other oddball stuff like Suzuki's Hayabusa-powered B-King Naked, also torquey in a 1.3 litre inline 4-cylinder kind of way, but obviously more revvy and, well, normal after a fashion, although the looks were suitably bonkers. It's a shame that the MT-01 didn't last longer and keep on evolving. Don't get me wrong, I'm impressed by the MT range as it is now. I did spend my own money on an MT-09 after all, and I'm a huge fan of both the MT-10 and MT-07, but it would have been interesting to see where the MT-01 would be now if Yamaha had maintained the emphasis on torque with an outsized engine and actively discouraged what seems to be the current universal pursuit of high RPM. Not to worry, as Don has proved with this absolute gem of a discovery, there are still lovely examples of the original MT-01 to be had, and like a fine wine that has only improved with age, this modern classic is perhaps even more of a gourmet delight now than it was back in 2005. Okay, ad break time, and then the latest news from the place we found this bike.